turn today to Joshua chapter 11. I trust that your Bibles are open to help us study this passage together. This chapter continues the description of Joshua's victories. It does so in such a laid-back manner, omitting all the details that might have been made it interesting, so that it's possible we miss the fact that some very important truths are being communicated. The final verse of the chapter is the provisional conclusion of the first half of the book of Joshua. The full conclusion is reached in the following chapter. Simply, and in a very matter-of-fact manner, we are told the land had rest from war, because Joshua took the entire land just as the Lord had directed. The steady progress of the previous verses has inexorably led up to this. In words that are carefully crafted to reflect God's promise to Abraham in Genesis 15 verses 18 to 21, and to Moses in Exodus 3 verse 8 and 17, the Lord fulfills his promises to the letter. The understated way the story is told is surely intended to communicate the thought, well, he would, wouldn't he? In the meanwhile, however, the chapter also stresses that to do this, the Lord accomplishes the humanly impossible. In chapter 10 we noticed that Israel was faced with a real enemy for the first time. In this chapter they face a superpower. Earlier they had subdued the substantial powers in the south of the land. Here they are faced with the northern coalition. Archaeological studies have confirmed the picture hinted at in the early verses. Hatzor was one of the megalopolises of the ancient world. The size of the ruins suggests it could have contained a population of 40,000 people, larger than the population of London until the last few centuries. But that's not all. It was the centre of a massive federation of city-states that were capable of raising a vast army, as numerous as the sand on the seashore, we're told, in verses 4 and 10. Such were equipped with the most sophisticated military hardware of the ancient world. We're told they had a large number of horses and chariots in verse 4, and had placed themselves strategically in the best defensive position at the waters of Merom. In the face of this, Israel was an ant engaged in a battle with an elephant. The situation was hopeless. In the previous chapter, the Lord merely repeated his earlier promises and encouraged Joshua to use his particular abilities as a military strategist. Here the story is different, and Joshua is given specific instructions. He's told that you're to hamstring their horses and burn their chariots. Throughout this book we've discovered that the Lord does not use an inflexible method, but whichever way he adopts, he leads his faithful people to victory. And so it proved in verses 6 to 19. Hatzor and all the surrounding cities are razed to the ground, totally destroyed and plundered. Just as God had said to Moses, and note the point is repeated in verses 12, 15, 20 and 23, so the Lord has delivered. This, as one scholar notes, says that although the narrative almost has the form of a chronicle, it does not fail to note that the credit of the victories belongs to the Lord. The one great victory is followed by a brief description of what was a long campaign in verse 18, perhaps as much as 7 years. Victory was won over the long haul, doubtless amid privation, danger, fear, uncertainty and disappointment. The Lord was rewarding faithfulness, endurance and stickability, even in octogenarian Joshua. In all this, the Lord demonstrates that the worst fears of the Israelites were unnecessary. Joshua, we're told, went and destroyed the Anakites so that no Anakites were left in Israelite territory. 45 years earlier, these incredible hulks had been seen as too great a challenge, even to the Lord who divided the Red Sea. Now they're given the briefest dimensions. Game, set, and straight sets win to the Lord. Thus God exposes the groundlessness of the fear and unbelief of the previous generation. But why such carnage? Interestingly, verses 19 and 20 seem to echo the start of the story back in Egypt. Sustained and repeated acts of unbelief had first hardened Pharaoh's heart, only for it to become hard, a condition that the Lord then confirmed by hardening it. Thus it was the Lord himself who hardened their hearts, as we're told in verse 20, because these people had been persistent rebels against his grace. They'd had more warnings than the Gibeonites. What a solemn warning against persistent unbelief. But what a fantastic chapter